have a few communications. First of all, on the decisions of various committees and the starting of interinstitutional negotiations under Rule 71(1, as announced on Monday, the 2nd of October, the president of the ECR group and the ID group and various individual members to reach the minimum threshold on 71(2 relating to a decision of the Libe decision to start negotiations for the following procedure: Schengen, border code. The vote will be held tomorrow. Concerning the other decisions to enter into negotiations, I have received no request for a vote in Parliament by members or a political group or groups reaching at least the medium threshold. The committees may therefore start negotiations. So, we return to the agenda. The first item for today's debate is the Council and Commission statements on the need for a speedy adoption of the asylum and migration package. Alongside colleagues, I would like to welcome the representatives of the Commission and Council. I would like to give the floor to the representative of the Council Secretary of State, Mr. Pascual Navarro Rios. I'd like to give him the floor for his remarks.
Señor Presidente.
President, ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, Vice President, Commissioner, before going into the topic on the agenda, the urgency of adopting this package, allow me to briefly refer to the external dimension of migration. We've had a debate on the MOU with Tunisia, 12th of September, in this Parliament. Since then, we have seen chaos in Lampedusa, thousands of persons arriving in a very short space of time. The figures are on the rise, all of these maritime routes. Central Mediterranean, very high numbers. We've seen an increase of irregular arrivals through the Greek islands, Cyprus, Canaries, as well as Peninsula Spain. These figures mean that we have to act holistically. We have a 10-point plan for Lampedusa from the Commission. In accordance with that, we need to address a number of areas, and we need to address both internal and external dimensions of migration. In the Council meeting, Justice and Home Affairs, 28th of September, the President put forward a proposal in terms of the external orientation of our migration policy in the EU, and we would like to have long-term collaboration with countries of transit and origin, and there was unanimous support for our proposal, in addition to which an efficient management of migration in the EU means that we have to tackle both the internal and external dimension. Both have to be fully functional. In other words, asylum applications for persons seeking help will be dealt with fairly, and individuals who do not meet the requirements for protection will be returned to their countries of origin, whilst fully respecting human rights and whilst fully respecting also the principle of no return. That now brings us on to the main point of this debate, this pact on asylum and migration. Council, on several occasions, has said that this pact is of fundamental importance if we are to guarantee our common asylum system, if we want to respond effectively to situations such as the ones that we've seen recently in Lampedusa. During the summer, we made considerable progress in our interinstitutional negotiations regarding the different parts of this pact, different proposals. And as co-legislators, we are determined to move forward. We want to adopt the necessary reform of this asylum system, and we want to do it by the end of this term, this cycle. Tripartite discussions regarding asylum, regarding the management of asylum and migration are being held regularly. We have different positions in some of the positions between Council and Parliament, important differences, but we are moving closer together. We're trying to seek rapprochement. Regarding the crisis regulation, so far we've not managed to reach an agreement for a date to start negotiations, in agreement with Council. Notwithstanding that, I think we're very close to a result. In the Justice and Home Affairs Council, 28th of September, a great number of member states expressed their support to a new draft text to this proposal. We are confident. We think that this mandate will be supported by a broad majority soon. That would allow us to start interinstitutional negotiations. And we also believe that we will be able to settle the main issues that need to be settled by the end of this cycle, by the end of this term. And I very much hope that the tripartite dialogues will resume as soon as possible regarding the control regulation and the Eurodac regulation. Also, I very much hope that we will be able to start or restart all negotiations on this very important proposal, and to do so soon. We have no time to lose, particularly bearing in mind recent events in central Mediterranean. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Commission and I give the floor to Vice President Shinas.
Herr President, querido Secretario de Estado, honorable members, before I start, let me, on behalf of the European Commission, express our feelings of sympathy for the terrible accident yesterday in Venice. Our thoughts are with the families of the victims and the Italian people. For the last 4 years in the Commission, in the current political cycle, when we had to deal with migration, we were obliged to work at the same time as architects and firefighters. Architects of a new regulatory framework that would be cohesive, holistic, global, and that would connect all the dots of a missing European migration and asylum policy, and at the same time, as firefighters, being obliged to cope with an endless series and sequence of crises, both at our external borders and in other parts of our territory. On the architect's track, I thank you for putting our asylum and migration pact on top of this House's political agenda. Recent events once more show that we need a European migration policy, we need the pact, and we need it now. The clock has run out on us on how long we can live in a house half built. Parallel to this regulatory work, we see every day our problems emerging, the cost of non-Europe emerging on migration, as we continue to work on the firefighting front, reacting to different events on a case-by-case basis with ad hoc tools and in a patchwork regulatory environment. This produces some results, it brings us some successes, but it prevents us from reaching the full efficiency, unity, and solidarity I am convinced, I know we can achieve. We have all seen the recent images from Lampedusa, and we still have similar images in our mind from Evros, from the Belarusia border with Poland and our Baltic states, Ceuta. We have seen the central Mediterranean route. Nearly 127,000 people have reached the EU so far from this route, almost the double compared to the period last year. There are increasing arrivals to the Greek islands as well as to the Canary Islands. And of course, there continue to be secondary movements, mainly towards Germany, France, and Belgium. More than 600,000 people applied for asylum this year, showing many also arrive legally in Europe. And over 4 million Ukrainian refugees continue to benefit from our blanket temporary protection status. We are addressing these challenges together at the same time. We just renewed the status of temporary protection for Ukrainian refugees until March 2025. We presented an effective 10-point plan to support Italy, reinforcing our support to Italy, notably through our work on the ground and our EU agencies. We're stepping up border surveillance at sea and in the air, and we are supporting proper registration of all people arriving. Parallel to that, we are reaching on the ground, reaching out to countries of origin and transit in Africa and elsewhere. I have last week traveled to Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Guinea, and I will travel next week to Mauritania and Gambia. We are working with these countries of origin to make sure that they understand that they have much more to benefit from the European Union by working with us rather against us. And we have, of course, stepped up the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding with Tunisia in very specific circumstances, also concerning fundamental rights. Finally, we are putting in place for November a very ambitious legal migration framework, a talent partnership that would align our jobs our vacancies in our job markets with available offer and expertise from the countries of origin that want to establish good working relations with. In this aspect, this scheme would certainly allow Tunisians to learn new skills and help meet the severe labor shortages hampering growth in our job market. Whilst we're addressing these firefighting challenges, we see and we come to an obvious conclusion. Unless we are able to address all these issues together at the same time, globally, we will never fully overcome these problems. We must now put in place a common European migration and asylum system, one that we have been building passionately over the last 3 years, and we are now very close to completing. A system that addresses all our difficulties, all our problems, with fast procedures at the border to identify asylum or return, with mandatory solidarity, helping member states under pressure, obliging all member states to contribute according to their ability and needs, with a reinforced returns system for those who have no right to be under our protection umbrella, and mutually beneficial migration partnerships with countries of origin, transit, and destination to find the smugglers who bring death to our seas and to develop safe legal pathways to Europe. All this in one package is called the EU Asylum and Migration Pact. We have come very far, much farther than we dared dream 4 years ago. Formerly divisive files like the Blue Card and the Asylum Agency are now adopted. Interinstitutional trilogues are underway for almost every single proposal in the Pact. And as we speak, querido Secretario de Estado, COREPER is debating the last missing link of the package, the crisis regulation. Like you, all of you, I keenly await the COREPER outcome and hope that the ambassadors, the permanent representatives of our member states, will understand the need to produce this agreement while the House of European Democracy is debating the Asylum and Migration Pact. Honourable members, time is running out. In a few months, there will be elections. We need the pact done and dusted before Europeans go out to vote. I ask you that once we have the green light from the Council, you adopt your mandate also on the return directive and continue trilogues on all other files. The whole of Europe is now watching us. Measuring carefully my word, I would say history is watching us. If we fail, then we will give fuel to the false claims made by the enemies of democracy, by Russian disinformation, that Europe is incapable of managing migration. But if we succeed, we will show that Europe can unite on this issue that's so important to our citizens. I remain convinced that the biggest incentive for irregular migration, probably the biggest pull factor, is the lack of a European migration and asylum system. Loopholes in the system we have today continue to be exploited and abused by smugglers. And this will remain the case until we make a difference. We have so much to be proud of our union. We are the largest and better regulated internal market in the world. We have the second strongest currency in the world. We are the champions of human rights, privacy, healthcare, education, and democracy. We have everything except a common migration and asylum policy worthy of the name. 3 years ago, when we presented the pact, that we knew at the time that it would not be an easy journey. And our progress so far has been as remarkable as it has been complex. We are so close now, but it will require sustained efforts from both this House and the Council. But above all, it will require courage, the courage of our conviction and the courage to take necessary compromises. We will not rebuild the Parthenon, but we now have a window of opportunity where everybody can agree upon. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Vizepräsident.
Thank you very much, Vice President. We now come to the representatives of the groups. I would like to start with Manfred Weber.
Herr Vizepräsident
Vice President Karas, Vice President Shinas, Council Representative, colleagues, Europe helps. The right of assembly, the UN Refugee Convention are essential for our continent. We have now more refugees than ever in Europe, at least over 3 million in Ukraine. We're not a fortress. We help more asylum seekers than any other continent. It's part of our DNA. We have borders, a lot of problems with capacities. A lot of mayors say that there's no housing left in Italy, Greece, etc. We're told that the figures must go down. And we have external borders where the Coast Guard should be in control, not the gangs. These people provide an essential service, they save people, but they also control. And we also need solutions. The agreement with Tunisia is important. 90% of boats start there. We can have a humanitarian control of our borders if we do it in cooperation with our neighbours. I'd like to thank the Dutch, German governments and Mrs. von der Leyen for this agreement. I would like Olaf Scholz and Mr. Macron accept this agreement. We can only do it in partnership with Tunisia, even though it's difficult. This agreement is an example for other agreements in North Africa. The Migration Pact, the second solution we need. After 7 years of debate, the Czech president managed to achieve a breakthrough. The Commission, Mr. Skinas, has done the essential work. The Parliament has done its bit. We're nearly there. we want to close by the end of the year. It's up to Mrs. von der Leyen to get these majorities. It won't solve all the problems as long as Africa is poor and Europe is rich. There will be migrants, but we can control things together and we can secure Schengen within Europe. I would like to go to some of the incorrect elements in the discussion. We've had discussions about securing borders if we need fences. We have the longest fence in Melilla in the north of Africa. The Green Minister gave the green light for putting up a fence in Finland. And Denmark is discussing whether we should carry out asylum procedures outside the EU. That's being proposed by Social Democrats. And I wonder, there's a talk of a new axis between Fico and Orban. Fico doesn't want to play along with the migration pact. The previous government under the EPP leadership were on board. I would like to have clarity from the Social Democrats in this discussion. Where do you stand? We'll have a lot of talk about moving to the right on migration issues. I'd like to hear what the Social Democrats think about Fico. The Italian government is taking all the refugees. They've opened their ports. The French Interior Minister, I don't want to have any migrants from Lampedusa in France. They're sending troops to the Italian borders. There's financing in Germany, but they don't want to take refugees rescued from boats in the Mediterranean. That's the incorrect elements in the discussion we have, and that must come to an end, colleagues. That's the truth we face. The option is either we succeed and we can close this open wound in Europe. I agree, this is a historical issue we face, perhaps the biggest and most important reform in this legislative term. To conclude on that, if we don't succeed, that'll be a programme for the populists, and we need to prevent that together. Thank you very much.
Nun hat das Wort gebeten.
The next speaker is Gabriele Bischoff.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, President. There are those who express things more diplomatically, others more directly. Migration policy, as it currently stands, has failed. Why is this? Not because so many people are coming to the continent of Europe, but because many want to have the advantages of membership of the European Union, but when it comes to hosting refugees, they want to leave that to their neighbours, or they refuse to register the refugees, simply hoping that they will move on speedily. I think that this lack of solidarity must be addressed, and this must be at the very heart of our new migration pact. Just because we are unable to act effectively doesn't mean that we can be outsourcing our responsibilities to Tunisia, giving them cash to solve our problems. This is completely wrong. We need to resolve our issues here, and we need a migration package which is based on our values and which indicates that we can practice solidarity and manage these problems. Member states where refugees arrive have to be able to manage the problems, but those of destination likewise. The Secretary of State has talked about the Tunisia package and said, well, you can dream all you like, but the way things are currently, it is not going to work. And we need to learn the relevant and requisite lessons. Let me be completely clear about this. We will negotiate in a robust way, but the fundamental right to asylum we will never call into question, because this would betray our very values, those values which bind us together. And therefore we need to come together to find the solutions which we so desperately need. We need to vanquish populism, and we need to recognise that, yes, robust negotiations are necessary, but a good solution is important, more important than anything else. And this is what the S&D is committed to. This is what we have consistently said, and we will support people who need our help in time of need. Thank you.
Redner.
The next speaker is Malik Asmani.
Well, dear President, dear Commissioner Stinas, dear Secretary of State, let me start by congratulating you, Secretary of State, because finally, at the Justice and Home Affairs meeting last week, we saw a glimmer of hope. And let's hope also that Coreper this morning will succeed. Hope for real progress on the Migration and Asylum Pact. Thinking ahead to the informal summit in Granada, Renew Europe wants this hope to be turned into results. Because there is no doubt, to adopt this migration pact, this mandate, we need an agreement before the end of this year. And we need to be realistic. To get this package over the line, a tremendous amount of work still needs to be done. This will require a constructive approach also in this House. And here, dear colleagues, I remind us all that we have a big responsibility in doing so. Because the agreement can only come from the political centre in this House. Let it be a broad majority that deliver real European solutions to the challenges of our time, as we did for COVID, as we continue to do for Ukraine. And we cannot reward those who spread fear about migration for electoral reasons, but vote against EU actions again and again. Managing migration in a proper way is not easy. It requires actions on all sides, including the external dimension. We need to engage with third countries to address the root causes of migration and provide also stability in the neighbourhood. And we know the building blocks. Fight the migrant smuggling networks. Solve the root causes of irregular migration. More legal pathways. And truly effective readmission and return policy. Of course, our agreements with third countries should not only concern stopping irregular migration, but they should be about investing in a long-term, broad partnership with our neighbouring countries and countries of origin. Colleagues, the last week have revolved around our crisis response to Lampedusa and the tragic events unfolding there. A European response is needed, and we need it now. In the migration pact, a crisis mechanism is foreseen. Why should we wait for the adoption of it? Why can we not anticipate? Start, for example, implementing real EU support for the border return procedures for those who are unlikely to be granted for asylum, for example. And to have some solidarity in the European Union towards Italy. Dear colleagues, the clock is ticking and we are already approaching extra time. Together, we can manage the challenges of migration. Where there is a will, there is a way. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Philippe Lambert.
Illégaux, clandestins.
Illegals, clandestines, migratory flows, pull factor, protecting our borders, refoulement, order to leave the territory, cold words, aseptic words, and they still, I think, confine, if you like, our debate on asylum and migration. These are words that exclude, and they hide the incredible violence that is inflicted upon people who are seeking our protection. The reality of the situation is that children, women, men are dying every day at the borders of Europe because we refuse to treat them with dignity. People being forced to leave their homes because of war, because of climate catastrophes. None of us would like to go through that. If we were in such a situation, all of us would do exactly the same thing. Each and every one of us would be exiles. You know that. Asylum and migration are complex issues. There are no simple answers, nor indeed a general opening of borders. But Fortress Europe is, of course, not a viable solution either. And that is, nevertheless, what the EU has been doing since 2015 with the Asylum and Migration Pact that is currently on the table for discussion. We're talking about stopping departures, strengthening our borders, sending people back to their countries of origin, even if they might be failed states or dictatorships. And, like I said, abuse of language, militia who are supposed to catch exiles, and we're providing that kind of support to the border guards that are supposed to save lives at sea. The question before us, colleagues, is this. First of all, does the EU bear some responsibility, a part of the responsibility, for the causes that force this form of exile? As far as we're concerned, yes, we do bear a part of that responsibility, and that is why, morally speaking, we have to shoulder that responsibility. And that brings me on to the second question. Does the EU have the means to do this? Manfred Weber said it. Some member states have already done a lot, but it's not the case for everyone. Collectively, we could do more, we could do better. And finally, does our union have the human resources that we need in order to meet the challenges of the 21st century, the climate transition, for instance? Our conclusion is that those who are seeking refuge with us are not a burden. No, quite the opposite. They could contribute to our overall welfare. The United Kingdom, since Brexit, has been experiencing this, and it's been a painful experience. A genuine pact should therefore re-establish safe routes for arrival and a fair distribution of exilees between member states. That is the way of breaking the business model of human traffickers. And if the EU really wants to address the causes for departure, then we need to revisit our political, economic and security relations with countries of departure to make sure that these countries are livable countries for those who are there. Dear colleagues, the way in which the EU deals with exilees at its borders is, in a way, an illustration of our flagrant denial of principles such as human dignity. Look no further. The main reason why the EU has lost credibility in the global south and in Africa in particular is because of this. So, rather than indifference, Pope Francis, in fact, spoke out about this indifference. Let us return to our duty of civilization and humanity instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicola Procaccini.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, colleagues. Reforming the European rules on immigration and asylum is absolutely correct. It is urgent and it is very important. But how do we do this? On the one hand, obviously, we do need to take in people who are fleeing war and persecution. On the other hand, we also have a duty to deal with illegal immigration. The red gold tainted with blood, which is greedily sought by the human traffickers, is based on sexual crime, on terrorism, on exploitation of workers, and is rampant across our borders. Illegal immigration is, of course, also weaponized by those who advocate the no borders ideology, which is all too common aboard these ONG boats. And this is indeed one of the problems which has arisen, the policy of the German government, in the light of the discussions on the Migration Pact. Using the taxes paid by the German citizens, the government is simply putting money into the pockets of those who are operating these illegal boats. This is not a logical solution. We need to address the issues of secondary migration to France and to Germany, and this is no way of doing it. There are some very radical theories about migration, but the reality is that we are denying one of the things which we achieved in history, which is the free movement of individuals and goods across the European Union. 2 days ago in Frankfurt, when many of us got off the plane from Italy, every single passenger was checked, including those who were coming to the European Parliament. And therefore, it is crystal clear for all to see that the Schengen borders are no more. The borders have been reinstated, and we have wide open borders at the external borders, but borders in the centre of the European Union. This is not the way to tackle illegal immigration. Until such time as we can, we will never be able to deal with legal immigration, and we need to, of course, provide for that. But the external agreements which we are engaged in negotiating have got to be based on proper policing and monitoring of our borders, got to be based on sensible thinking and abandoning this no-holds-barred utopian vision of the last century. Thank you.
Zanni.
Marco Zanni, the next speaker.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Today we commemorated the sad anniversary of the tragedy in Lampedusa. We commemorated the loss of life which took place on that occasion and the number of people who were drowned there. But here we are today talking about what have we achieved to try to tackle this problem in the last 10 years. The answer is clear to see all around. We've done absolutely nothing. We've achieved absolutely nothing. We haven't managed to reduce the number of people coming to their deaths in the Mediterranean. On the contrary, the national institutions, the supranational institutions have failed. NGOs have failed. Even the courts have failed. Matteo Salvini is the Minister of the Home Affairs in Italy, and it's not me that said this. It's also borne out by the UN agency figures. As he said, you can go and look it all up. You can see 2015 in Italy, 150,000 people arrived, 3,000 people lost or died. 2016, over 180,000 people arrived, 4,000 people died. In 2017, 120,000 to 3,000 people died. This was all under the governing socialists. What has happened more recently, representatives of elected institutions have established a number of principles which should be self-evident in Italy, but also in Europe. More widely, you can only come in legally. In 2018, we saw a reduction, 1,000 people died. In 2019, the number of deaths fell and the number of arrivals fell. We actually reached the lowest point, and we seem to be achieving something resembling protection of our external borders. However, since then, the numbers have climbed very rapidly. And at the end of all these numbers and data, what I'd like to ask you is a question. Who has actually contributed to reducing any deaths? The numbers are quite clear. We haven't done enough. And this shows quite clearly that we've got to find some solutions. And we've got to find a way to stop people leaving the countries that they're coming from. And we've got to find a way to stop these deaths in the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Manon Aubry.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I listened carefully to, especially to that side of the chamber. One thing struck me there. You talk about migration. The reason gives place to some hysteria. The nightmares of the right about migration gives way to another reality. We didn't have an invasion in Lampedusa, but 12,000 men, women and children fleeing misery and war, and are now in terrible conditions. We shouldn't. It's when you get onto one of these boats, it's not like getting on a cruise ship. It's 0.03% of the European population. So the migration invasion, it's a fable that the far right is whipping up to make people afraid. Colleagues on the far right, Mr. Zanni, Mr. Bardella, this lie, this wolf doesn't exist. 4 million Ukrainians are fleeing war, but we're not capable of taking on 12,000 migrants. Is it their skin colour or their religion that bothers you? Commissioner, the EU is responsible for the chaos in Lampedusa, wished by the far right and put in place by the Liberals. You've shut down reception centres. You've criminalised NGOs, sidelined their fundamental rights. You signed shameful agreements with countries like Tunisia, which let people drown and die of thirst. You've created tragic conditions which have been repeated year after year in the south of Europe. The crisis regulation shuts our eyes to the violation of fundamental rights of refugees. It's always the same recipes, more broken lives. If your objective is to limit migratory flows, the policy is not efficiency. How many more deaths in the Mediterranean do we have to see before you understand that your policies are not working? As we keep saying, we need to have a reception policy which protects rights. We need to protect NGOs and have proper S&R. We need to show solidarity rather than the approach that you are in favour of. For the non-attached, I give the floor to Laura Ferrara.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. 3 years on and 8 years from the very beginning of these discussions on the Migration Pact, we still haven't seen the light of day. And it is countries like Italy in the Mediterranean that's paying the price for all this delay and failure. Let me remind you once again, Lampedusa is Italian, yes, but it's also a border of the European Union. And it is a land of hope for migrants, refugees who have escaped from war, starvation and the climate crisis. And what are we doing to mitigate their plight? Nothing. We are exacerbating it. We need to have a proper piece of European legislation based on good sense, on providing legal means of entering the European Union. We are absolutely fed up of having to countenance these deaths in the Mediterranean, 26,000 over the last few years, and we need to have a shared responsibility at long last. We need to show through facts and action that we're stronger than extremism and nationalism. Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Sharon Niles.
Yes, thank you, President. Dear colleagues, in 2016, the Juncker Commission presented its proposals for a better EU asylum and migration policy, learning the lessons of the 2015 refugee crisis. And ever since that moment, we have been waiting for the day that member states would finally find an agreement so we can do what our voters expect from us, managing migration in a better way. And we requested this debate this morning to put the pressure on. Member states ambassadors meeting this morning have to urgently find an agreement on the last remaining part of the pact, the crisis regulation. They must deliver today, because only then will we have a window of opportunity to really make an impact. And even that window will not be open forever. We cannot afford to lose any more time. We have to conclude this now, whatever it takes, because we need this pact. We need it to rebuild trust among our member states, to move from ad hoc individual responses to an EU-wide permanent solution based on solidarity. And we need it because fair sharing of responsibility will only happen when we have our European house in order. We need to strengthen our external borders, fight people smugglers and the instrumentalization of migrations, and we need more effective returns. And we need this pact mostly also to regain the trust of our citizens and to show them that we are capable of managing migration in a responsible way by finding solutions in the centre, instead of leaving the narrative to the open border shouters on the extreme left or the zero migration shouters on the extreme right. And I would like to thank Vice President Skinas for his relentless efforts in trying to break the deadlock and find a reasonable landing zone for almost all member states. His pact will prove to be a historic breakthrough in one of the most sensitive policy areas in the EU. But we first need to make it happen. And the EPP is committed to constructively playing its role and get this done. You can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pedro Marques, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Vice President Skinas, it is indeed a timely debate, this one. Just 2 days ago, President Sayed said he doesn't need our charity. You see, Mr. Vice President, exporting the migration challenges faces this nasty reality, particularly if you think of paying an authoritarian regime a few billions will do the trick. I can even imagine President Sayed furious, thinking, so I was doing them a favor and now they want to come here and see how I'll treat the migrants. No way. The problem, Commissioner, and Mr. Weber, by the way, is that they don't even want us to have a glimpse on what they do with our money. They just continue with their policies with no regard for human rights. In the meantime, people did not stop coming, stranded in dangerous vessels through the summer, while we were already supposedly dealing with the implementation of the memorandum. We have to address migration in a completely different way. What we need is solidarity with the refugees, but also with those member states, particularly Italy, where they arrive in Europe, and with the communities where they are finally hosted. It is obvious we need to manage migration at our borders, handling the situation of the illegal arrivals, but certainly it doesn't have to be done in an inhumane way. So, Commissioner and Mr. Weber, let us refocus our energies on the Pact on Migration. Show real solidarity towards the frontline countries. Step up our capacities at the Mediterranean to arrest the smugglers. Increase the search and rescue capacity of this Europe and support the refugee seekers. And let's not forget to put a priority into working with the origin and transit countries. We have Global Gateway. Let us make it count and build true partnerships for development. Where the populists want us to fail, let's go humane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Sophia Netvel.
Mr. Minister, Mr. Commissioner, it has been said by many that the clock is ticking. We owe it to the citizens of Europe to finally adopt a proper asylum and migration policy. And so we are eagerly awaiting the position of the Council on the crisis regulation, which is the key to the rest of the package. But I warn you, that's not the end of the process, because a negotiating mandate should leave sufficient margin for negotiations and compromise with the European Parliament. It cannot be rigid. It's the start of negotiations between the two legislators. I hear many people talk about realism. Realism means working seriously on the internal dimension of migration policies, a proper common European asylum and migration policy that includes not just mandatory solidarity, but mandatory relocation, because only that is real solidarity. The famous blueprint Tunisia deal turns out not to be a blueprint, but a fob, a blueprint of how not to do it, because a deal that props up a dictator, that leads to massive human rights violations and deaths, a deal that is not enforceable and that has done absolutely nothing to reduce the number of arrivals is not a blueprint, but only a blueprint for how not to do it. It's high time, after so many years, that the member states take their responsibility. This House is ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jordi Soler, the floor is yours.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President. We have been debating for years how to go about adopting a common asylum and migration policy. And this is one of the most polarised topics for debate that we've ever had, partly because of populism, partly because the extreme right weaponises this whole topic, and partly because there is urgency right across the board to adopt the package. The current arrangements obviously are a complete failure in terms of human rights, lives lost, and suffering on our external borders. We have not shown enough responsibility as individual governments, and NGOs are simply being put in the dock for having rescued migrants from sea. We need to make progress, and we need to have proper negotiations based on solidarity. We need legal means of access. Asylum and migration should be part of international law founded on human rights, which must be fully respected in cooperation with third countries and on our borders. All these issues in the area of migration have to be based on a response founded on human dignity. We've got to improve our absorption rates throughout our society. We have to be able to have proper reception centres and proper resettlement. Thank you.
Frau Beata Szydło.
Thank you. The next speaker is Beata Szydło.
Panie Przewodniczący, Szanowny Panie Komisarzu, Szanowni... Dear President, dear Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the proposal of the European Commission included in the Migration Pact, will they protect Europe against illegal migrants? Will they guarantee security for Europeans? No, these are not good solutions. I heard similar proposals in 2016 when I was the Prime Minister of Poland. After the crisis, that was due to an invitation by Germany extended towards illegal migrants, we had to seek for solutions to protect Europeans and Europe against illegal migration. These solutions back then were not the good ones. And now, after years, we are back at square one. Yet another migration crisis. Thousands of illegal migrants who end up in Europe. Human smugglers, human trafficking. NGOs from Germany which finance these kinds of actions. We need to block it. We need to say no. And Poland wants to find this kind of solutions that will help these people who really need help. We want to help people who suffer, who flee from war. Poland has taken refugees from Ukraine, and we have proven that it is possible. But I want it to be clear, Poland will never agree to admit illegal migrants. We will never agree to their relocation. We will never agree to these absurd fees for people being relocated. Thank you.
Madam, do you accept the blue card? Do you accept the blue card from Mr. Kohut? Yes. Okay, Mr. Kohut.
Premier, przestańcie sztuczne.
Please stop saying these kind of things, because this is a serious problem that the whole of Europe has been facing. You use it as political fuel. 7 days a week, you are doing this kind of thing. Why didn't you get additional money from the EU for Ukrainian migrants? Are you that incompetent, or is that your policy that you want to really use these migrants to win elections? Is that a Christian approach? And in the meantime, you've been selling Polish visas because this is just simply not fair.
Szanowni Państwo, ja szanuję.
Ladies and gentlemen, I do respect the decision-making process in the European Parliament, so I will not conduct an electoral campaign right now, because this is what my colleague has been attempting to do. Let me reiterate, Poland is for the security of Europeans and Europe. We will protect Poland.
Our next speaker is Mr. Jordan Bardella.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, Lampedusa, that tragic situation is our future if we don't take back control of our borders in France and elsewhere. Von der Leyen encouraged member states to welcome these persons from Lampedusa even though they don't meet asylum requirements. Remember the principle of non-refoulement. European judges have actually instituted a pull factor and are encouraging so many people to come to Europe. Look at Frontex. It's not actually a border guard. It's actually now acting as some kind of reception facility. There is no alternative to being firm. Standing firm means protecting the people of Europe against a brutal world. Mass migration leads to cultural devastation and indeed social consequences. Therefore, being firm, standing firm, is deterring people from crossing, avoiding human tragedy. We cannot actually unconditionally welcome everyone in Europe. It cannot be done because, of course, Europe will never be a territory that belongs to anyone, everyone, without a history. This is the land of our history, of our Europeans, and we are the ones who decide who may enter. The only ones who can decide what we want. We want to be, in the 21st century, what we intend to be. Thank you.
Zu Wort gemeldet ist.
The next speaker is Malin Björk.
Friends, colleagues, a speedy adoption of the package. But of what package? What policies? From our side, in the left, and in partnership with citizens and organizations across and movements across Europe, we have consistently asked for a European policy where we have a shared responsibility between the member states to receive people. We have a reception with dignity, where we save lives in the Mediterranean, and where we cooperate with third countries in order to propose democracy, peace, economic and social development, and human rights. And the way negotiations are going is the very opposite. The European Union is making deals with authoritarian leaders, be it Erdogan or in Turkey or in Tunisia. You want to see, and you're negotiating currently, a system built on systematic detention at borders and return to any country, even a safe third country where people just pass by. This is, and we have a system of systematic violence at the EU borders. This is what happens when the center-right give in to the extreme-right racist narrative, a racist and authoritarian narrative. It is very dangerous. We know that we can do differently. We have seen it with the reception of Ukrainian refugees. Thankfully, we have seen that, fleeing Putin's bombs and his war. We have seen solidarity between member states. We have seen dignified reception conditions. So we know it can be done. Now we also have to replicate and do the right thing when it comes to all refugees seeking protection in Europe from other wars, from other conflicts. This pact is not our pact.
Okay. Herr Kollege Kostas Papadakis.
Kostas Papadakis.
We will not allow the crime of Pilos to be forgotten. We seek answers that the Greek government, the EU and Frontex are not providing. The meetings of EU ministers as well as Med9 reaffirmed the common understanding to reinforce repression and a triage system for refugees according to capitalist needs. Therefore, we see that the Greek and Turkish governments are planning a new joint statement that will reactivate deportations, that will reinforce prosecution and repression to the detriment of people fleeing imperialist wars, which are compounded by the terrible situation we see today in the Aegean, where people are drowning, they are being pushed back, and there are human traffickers active. There is bargaining going on this agreement against the backdrop of imperialist competition. This is why Greek and other workers need to have a joint fight against the EU and the capital and the government.
Gebeten hat unser Kollege Paulo Rangel.
Paulo Rangel.
Yours.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender, Senhor Secretário de Estado.
Secretary of State. Vice President. Asylum and migration policy requires a reform urgently. I support the Commission and Vice President Skinas in his efforts to reach an agreement in 2023, so that from 2024, after the elections in particular, we have an asylum and migration pact in Europe that can be implemented. To achieve that, it is essential to be aware that our policy must be designed based on fundamental rights and human dignity, fundamental rights of migrants, whether they're legal or illegal, but all the European citizens must be taken into account. So we're in favour of strict controls on the external borders. We must act against these smugglers and traffickers who exploit people's misery. And if there are migrants in an illegal situation, they must be securely and properly sent back. We shouldn't forget that it's important to have agreements with third countries, and we need dialogue platforms so that illegal migrants can be sent back, and we need development aid to ensure that these flows aren't necessary. The EPP is very clear on this. Only if we can protect our external borders, only then can we maintain human rights. We don't want to see what happens in Lisbon. There are flats with 20 people living in them. These are not human rights. To handle human rights properly, we should take those who have a right to come here. All migrants or asylum seekers have the right to migration and reception, but we can control who has the right to come in and who doesn't.
Aguilar am Wort.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Lopez Aguilar.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident Karas. Vicepräsident Skinas.
Thank you very much, President. President, Minister, colleagues, yesterday we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the tragedy of Lampedusa, and sadly, all too many subsequent tragedies have occurred. And on each occasion, one pauses to ask oneself, well, where is Europe? This is not Europe. And yet, this seems to be what it is. This is not what the European Parliament is trying to do in its work. We've been demanding a proper framework for search and rescue, for migration. We've been trying to adopt all our negotiating framework on all the migration package reports, because we feel there is a strong sense of shared responsibility and we need effective legislation to cover, for example, reception and search and rescue, and we need to implement the mandate from Lisbon. This Parliament has worked long and hard to overcome differences across the groups. The Council needs to do the same. Come together and resolve your differences of opinion. It's high time the Council thought about something more than conflicting, contradictory national interests. Think about the Europeans. Think about the principle of solidarity. Think about solidarity for the migrants. The Spanish presidency, please, you need to have a successful conclusion on this migration package by the end of your presidency. Otherwise, it will be not just discouraging, it will be absolutely disastrous and a destruction for Europe. It will be a failure to fulfill our promises. It will be a destruction of our primary legal responsibilities, which are one of the founding pillars of our raison d'être as an institution. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Fabienne Keller.
Fabienne Keller.
Vice President Mr. Skinas, President Ottmar, Minister, if we want to have the European Pact on asylum and migration before the elections, difficult decisions have to be taken now, colleagues. It's a moment of truth for Member States, first of all. We are looking forward to the Council positions, as you said, on the crisis regulation. This text is one of the cornerstones of the Pact. Couldn't we imagine a credible reform with a crisis management mechanism? That's what we have to say to the inhabitants of Lampedusa. It's a moment of truth for the European Parliament between those who want to have a real European response to the challenges of migration with responsibility and boldness, and those who want nothing and who want to make these negotiations failed. I'm shocked by the attitude of the far right. And in front of the cameras to spread horrors. In fact, the far right is not working on the issue. Mr. Bardella and Mr. Zemmour are absent. They're absent from the negotiations where important decisions are being taken. With my group, Renew, we are determined to conclude this important reform. We are ready to take our responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Merci. Madame Tineke Strik.
Thank you very much. Tineke Strik.
Chair, Council, Commissioner. Asylum seekers face an ever more lawless Europe. A Europe of pushbacks, inhuman reception conditions, unlawful detention becoming the new normal. But make no mistake, this is not due to a lack of EU legislation. It's a result of unequal responsibility sharing and total impunity for the member states. So yes, we need a new pact, but one rooted in solidarity, one that harmonizes standards of protection and is coupled with credible enforcement. And the current pact positions offer a mixed bag. Mandatory relocation is promising, but border procedures and increased derogations will only undermine the harmonized protection that we mean to achieve. So I urge Council and Parliament to focus on actually strengthening the system through real solidarity and a truly common framework. And I urge the Commission to show us that our lawmaking is not in vain, and that any current and future laws are finally enforced. Thank you.
Merci. Monsieur Charles.
Thank you very much, Charlie Weimers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, do you really want to fix this migration crisis? You, Commissioner Skinas, you say it out loud. The pact is intended to deprive the demagogues and populists in Europe from campaigning on migration in the EU elections. Commissioner, are you even aware what's going on in Sweden? Ordinary men and women face the consequences of a migration policy that spawned the monster that is gang violence. Where's your pact for the 25-year-old girl blown up by gangsters, or the 71-year-old shot in the pub while having a pint? Your job, Mr. Skinas, I'm sorry, but it's not to be campaign manager for the left. It's to deal with illegal migration. So do your job and inform us on how we escort the boats back to their ports. Otherwise, the low-intensive war on the Swedish streets, as the police puts it, will worsen. You laugh. Laugh to the 17 innocent victims shot to death, bombed to death in Sweden. Shame on you. You know, this will become reality in your as well.
Monsieur.
Thank you, sir.
Madison.
Thanks so much, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, dear Minister. And I'm just spending 10 seconds to just announce for the President. It's very polite, of course, for the leftists to laugh about the murders and the killings, what's going on in Sweden, because you don't care about that. You're selfish, overpaid bureaucrats who have tried to force your migration policy in the last 40 years, and you have failed. You have absolutely failed. We see that in left-wing governments in Western Europe. So that's why you have no alternatives. You're just talking about the free, open borders, helping the people. But where's the limit? Is the sky only the limit? How much does it cost? What's going on with the security on the streets? Are you also ready to send your kids alone to play outside? No. Because that's your fault. Still, in Poland or in Estonia, I don't have to worry about my kids. But our alternative makes sense. Just look about your own socialist colleagues in Denmark. They just had an agreement with Rwanda to have hotspots out from Europe, and 10 we're going to choose who are real refugees and who are illegal migrants. The fact is, I was last week in Lampedusa, that 90% of the migrants are young men, and they're illegals. They are not refugees, and you are lying to our own people. We are the only ones who love Europe and our own people to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Madison, do you accept the blue card? Yes. Ms. Melchior.
The efforts of the Danish government in Rwanda. The efforts of the Danish government are pies in the sky, castles in the sky. They're not actually coming to anything. Rwanda does not respect human rights. How can you propose that we want to send refugees, asylum seekers to Rwanda, and your claims that they are undocumented refugees, that they do not have rights to seek safety in Europe? Where are your facts on this? And I would wish that you base your statements in this hall of plenary on facts and not loose ideas.
That's actually very good that you're pointing about the facts, because very often we are hearing here about the false claims that most of them are just young women and kids. That's not the fact. I was last week meeting with a Red Cross organization in Lampedusa. We're asking the facts. And please tell me honestly who they are. Just Do you have the numbers? How many have arrived? 64,000 people this year arrived only to Lampedusa. Huge majority of them, about 85–90%, were men. That's the fact. About Denmark, yes, it has to be make work. And that's also your work. Because what is the solution? What is the alternative? Just open the borders, take them in, and then 40% of the illegals are not sent back because you're not capable for that. So your solution is pretty bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nun hat Herr Vizepräsident
The next speaker is Vice President Papadimoulis.
Let's be honest, colleagues. We do need a common European policy of asylum and migration, but in order to achieve that, we need a lot less hypocrisy and true solidarity between member states. A true practical solidarity towards the countries of reception that are under immense pressure, like my country, Greece. A distribution of responsibilities between member states for obligatory, mandatory relocation, a true system that will put an end to the loss of human lives, true policies of integration that will boost our societies and our economies, and a true respect of humanitarian rights and the international commitments of the EU. We have heard a lot of grandstanding of the far right that is trying to utilize the migration and refugee crisis because they want to undermine the united Europe and representative democracy. We should not allow this. Until the end of the year, we must come to this pact, to agree upon this pact. The Council, the Spanish presidency should do their part, as well as the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Balázs Hidvegi.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, besides Lampedusa, some of the latest news about migration in Europe, the Swedish government is now talking about the deployment of the army against criminal gangs of migrants because the police are no longer enough to handle the situation and maintain order and protect citizens. Illegal migrants have used firearms against Hungarian and Croatian border guards recently. The Schengen zone is in critical danger because of illegal migration. More and more internal border controls are reinstated because of it. Meanwhile, the German government has happily admitted that it funds organizations that tacitly cooperate with criminal gangs of human smugglers and then transport these people into Italy. Now, just to make it clear, migration is destroying the European way of life. It creates insecurity for our citizens, and it must be stopped. Now, some of you may be multiculturalism maniacs, despite all the clear evidence against it, but that's your problem. But we're never going to let that happen to our countries. We, Central Europeans, did not join the European Union to now endanger our freedom of movement, to now endanger our culture and the security of our citizens. We're going to defend our way of life. We're going to protect our countries, our people, and our culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Thomas Tobé. The floor is yours.
Thank you, President. Europe has faced a migration crisis after migration crisis. The situation in Lampedusa shows this again. And colleagues, we really are at a crossroad now. Either we continue down this road where member states act independently, we try to meet the situation with ad hoc solution, or we build common European solutions and actions, where we can have control of the borders, where we can make a bigger difference between people who have the right to protection in Europe and irregular migrants, and where we work with cooperation in Europe and with third countries. We cannot have this situation where only a few member states shall bear the big responsibility of the migration policy. And I really would like to urge colleagues, we have an opportunity to really do something. And of course, I put my trust in the center-right, But I would also like to acknowledge that parts of the ECR group also voted in favor of going into negotiations, and I welcome that, because I really think that we need to make sure that we have a broad support for the new migration policy. With the Migration Pact hopefully adopted, of course, we also need to do more about the smugglers. We cannot have a situation where it is smugglers who actually decide who has the right to enter European territory. And in my book, you need cooperation with third countries. Of course, not easy with Tunisia. Of course, not even easy with Turkey. But what is the alternative? The EPP group is here to deliver, to again build trust amongst our citizens and make sure that we have a European migration policy that actually works. Thank you.
Thank you. Unsere nächste Rednerin ist Frau.
The next speaker is Birgit Sippel.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. In the months ahead, we could conclude the work that's been going on for years on the reform of asylum. We're working on that intensively. It's necessary because how this reform will actually look, the positions of Parliament and Council are very different. My Social Democratic group is prepared for difficult negotiations. Manfred Weber from the EPP seems to see that differently. The position of the Parliament, he's ignoring that, and he simply wants to wave through the Council position. And evidently, many member states see that in the same way. And like Mr. Weber, they show a shabby understanding of the significance of Parliament as an equal co-legislator and a lack of democratic understanding. None of the two institutions can decide the migration package itself. Both must make compromises. The preparedness of that is lacking on the side of some member states and also Mr. Weber. Migration is a challenge and also an opportunity. The tasks associated with that are manifold, and an agreement on asylum could be a solid cornerstone. Alongside an asylum package, we need rules for labour migration, a more intensive cooperation with local authorities and countries of origin, and also targeted support. So, there are good perspectives for our citizens and for refugees. We have an opportunity. Let's take it. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Sippel. Und wir machen.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Jan-Christoph Oetjen.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, verehrte.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. 2015 was the year of the major migration crisis in the EU. Here, 8 years later, we are engaged in the self-same debate. Colleagues, the citizens of Europe don't understand why politics takes so long to catch up with events and to find solutions to problems. We owe them a response, and we really owe it to the citizens to make progress to deliver a solution before the elections. And we are not that far off the mark. On the other hand, it has to be said it's unacceptable that the crisis regulation is simply being held hostage for political game playing. And this is coming, of course, from the right of the political spectrum. This is simply not acceptable. It is not acceptable to block negotiations on a package, on the migration package in particular, because of self-seeking aspirations. There is far too much at stake. The danger is too great that we fail on this whole migration package, and this absolutely must not happen. We therefore need to act quickly. We need to ensure that the Council takes the requisite action very quickly and that the Member States implement the agreements which we have reached. We will have to get control of the migration issue. We've got to have much better and more humane standards on our borders, and we've got to have a proper crisis management system worth the name. Thank you. Eric Marquardt.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. What I'm worried about, that I get the impression that in the debate about the pact, many member states think that refugees must be treated worse than today. Every day, treat them a little bit worse than yesterday. And then at some point they'd stop coming. It's so cynical that we're discussing whether the people should save people at sea. It's not the question of people are in need at sea. The question is they should be saved and let them drown, and so that others wouldn't be trafficked. If we think that this policy doesn't lead just to misery, it doesn't work. People are being scared off, but they're still coming. We forget that humanity and the rule of law aren't just add-ons to our democracy. They're cornerstones of. It's the cornerstone of what constitutes Europe. I think if member states want to be successful, it will be important that they show trust amongst their population. And many things in the pact, what we're talking about now, is happening already. Share distribution, fair distribution in the labour market. We could improve things and have legal rather than illegal migration. Because it's not happening, it's not because we don't have a pact, because there's a lack of political will, and I'd like us to start with that now and continue to negotiate afterwards. Thank you very much.
Please.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. It's hypocritical to organise a debate on the urgency of this pact. Eurodac, for instance, has been paralysed because this Parliament is blackmailing the Member States. We have a permanent emergency because of mass migration. Thousands of illegal migrants arriving in the Canaries over just 2 days. There's violence. And very soon they'll be, in fact, at the airport in Madrid, and they can go anywhere in Europe. They come here to get benefits, benefits which are paid for by the working and middle classes of Europeans, but not in order to contribute. It's not just Lampedusa. The whole of Europe is in the hands of the mafia. This is a multi-billion business. This is a form of trade. We're talking about human rights, we're talking about false refugees, but, you know, that's not saving lives in Mediterranean or elsewhere. We're supposed to feel guilty, but you are the guilty party, and history will show that. No Europeans will be vanquished in this way. We're not going to give up our freedom, our streets, our families. We will not be defeated. If we don't defend our borders, we will have to defend our streets, and otherwise we will be simply confined to our homes, and that is not the way forward. Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Tom van Driesche, please.
Voorzitter, collega's, asielrecht.
Colleagues, asylum law is being exploited as a channel for illegal immigration into Europe. Total asylum chaos is the name of the day. Everybody is aware of the problem, but nobody will resolve it. Nobody is able to act. And indeed, it seems to be a self-fulfilling prophecy which all parties involved want to continue. Actually, the European Union wants more migration. They simply want to turn illegal migration into legal migration so that millions of Africans every single year can come into Europe legally, because after all, migration is necessary. As Commissioner Johansson has said, we don't have enough births in Europe. The birth rate is too low. And Commissioner Jourova has also said this. So the colonization of Europe and the subjugation of the Europeans, the destruction, indeed the suicide of our unique culture, is what we face through this migration pact, which is an absolute scandal.
Sira Rego, please.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, Secretary of State. At this point, I don't think we can doubt anymore that this migration pact is actually a monstrosity, and it has been tailor-made for the far right. Just when we thought that nothing could surprise us anymore, well, along comes Maloney and asks for just a little bit more, namely criminalising rescue NGOs. For years and years, we've been listening to a narrative that dehumanises migrants. Maybe that makes it more tolerable to accept that these people drown at sea, or that they're returned to a desert, or that they are tortured in places like Libya. Mr. Skinas, I turn to you. All of this suffering is actually being paid for by our money. We are allocating more and more resources to militarise our borders, to externalise our borders, and all of this will be locked down in the new pact. I think you're hiding the fact that the asylum procedure has been turned into a labyrinth from which there is no escape. You can't actually meet these requirements to access your rights. And this is not about outsiders. It's actually about an attack on our whole system of rights that give Europe its very meaning. Thank you.
Is Mr. Ivan Vilibor-Sinčić, please.
Colleagues, the cause of migration are centuries of exploitation of African and Asian countries by European colonizers who went to search the resources for the industry. Also, we have now indebtedness, and world economists say that Africa has been robbed of 3 decades of development by debt. In my country, Croatia, in Karlovac, we have many incidents because we have large groups of migrants that citizens do not feel safe with on the streets. Illegal migrants can cross borders without legal documents, and we cannot cross borders without documents. Borders have to be in order. We need our army to prevent entry into our countries to those who do not have the right who enter. Croatia is a safe country and needs to remain safe. We do not want another Sweden.
Please.
Dear colleagues, I will speak Lithuanian.
We cannot ignore a new form of hybrid warfare, the instrumentalized migration, where dictators use migration as a weapon. We must make this clear in the EU documents. States that border unpredictable regimes, such as Belarus and Russia, must have the tools to respond effectively to the instrumentalization of migrants. Let me thank the Commission and Honourable Commissioner for your help when Lukashenko attacked my country. Why do dictators organize hybrid attacks against EU countries? Well, because they know all the loopholes in our legal system, in our external borders, and therefore they are able to cause chaos. They use misled people as a weapon against us. By failing to protect our borders, we contribute to the smugglers' business and help dictators to initiate attacks. I therefore find it very strange that the socialists and other leftists in the Libe Committee have removed the Commission's proposal on the instrumentalization of migration from the Schengen's Border Act. This must be brought back. The EP's position in the trilogue cannot be to present this act without important provisions to protect the external borders from deliberately organized attacks against us. We must fix the loopholes in the EU legal framework. I call on my colleagues tomorrow to do so. The urgency to launch a trilogue must not be at the expense of the quality of the document, and I ask the colleagues to return this into the document.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. It's 3 years now that we have been working on the legislative proposals in this pact, and we have played our full part as co-legislators. We have worked on compromises across the political spectrum, and we have distilled from a lot of disparate ideas a lot of constructive work. The Commission's talked about firefighting and about the architects of a future policy, but what have we actually achieved so far? So far, of course, the Council is still trapped in disagreement, and there are some absurd suggestions from countries such as Italy, where there seems to be some kind of informal bilateral agreement based on some perception of the policy implications, which is actually contributing nothing to finding a legitimate and properly constructed pact and solution, which will finally help us to treat migration as a necessity and the policy be constructed on a more humane basis. We have got to treat people properly. We've got to learn from Lampedusa. We've got to make it possible to have integration, and we've got to practice policy on the basis of solidarity. Thank you.
Speaker is Ms. Hilde Woutmans, please.
Dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter, commissaris, collega's.
Thank you very much, President. 10 years after Lampedusa, it's extremely painful to observe the complete dearth of proper policy in the area of migration. We've got more border controls internally. We've got women and children being drowned at sea, coming to land after a traumatic journey. We've got millions of applicants for asylum who've simply gone missing, and many, many people who have gone missing during their tragic journey across the sea. It's absolutely painful to see that we've got no deal in place, we've got no proper pact that will actually address any of these issues. I've heard a million suggestions, all sorts of things from the left and utter absurdities from the right side of the House, but it is our duty to protect children. At the very least, there are 10,000 children this year alone who have gone missing, either on the way here or on our continent. Children are always the victims in migration, and we have absolutely got to do something to address this issue immediately. Thank you.
Okay, dear colleagues, I missed the blue card from Ms. Sophie Infeld to Mr. van Driesche. Mr. van Driesche, do you accept that blue card? There was a blue card which I missed for you from Mrs. Sophie Infeld. Would you accept that blue card? Okay, so please come here, and then I give the floor to Ms. Sophie van Infeld, and I apologize for having missed this. Thank you. Please.
Yes, Chair, maybe actually I should address the question to you, because I've had this exchange with Mr. van der Driessen many times. He is using a term which is a Nazi term, and he knows that full well. And I would like to ask you, Mr. Chair, rather than Mr. van der Driessen, whether the use of Nazi terminology in this hemicycle is acceptable. He uses the term omvolking, which is the Dutch version of umvolkung, which is a Nazi term. Do we accept that in this hemicycle, Chair? I would really like an answer to that. I've had the exchange with Mr. van der Driessen many times in the Libe Committee. He does it on purpose. He knows it's Nazi terminology, and yet he continues to use it.
I guess the question was addressed to myself. As a chair today, of course, we do not accept Nazi terminology in this House. I will report this to the Bureau, and we will discuss it with the President and with my colleagues in the Bureau. Thank you very much for this. And I think the question was not addressed to you, but to myself. But you have 30 seconds to respond.
Dank u, voorzitter. Nu.
Thank you, President. Mr. Verhofstadt, I know that it's difficult for Liberals to recognise the need for freedom of expression. Now, I realise, Ms. in 't Veld, what your position is, but I am entitled to use my right to freedom of expression, and it is only right and proper that I be given this opportunity. I am as entitled to take the floor as you. And in terms of omvolking, it is simply a replacement for migration. Because what is going to happen is that our people is going to simply be conquered by these people coming to the community.
Not use freedom of expression. I will report this to the Bureau, and we will come back to this. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mr. Carême. La parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le. Thank you, President. Yesterday we celebrated a sad anniversary, that of the Lampedusa tragedy, the 3rd of October 2013, the death of 400 people led to European solidarity and putting in place the Mare Nostrum policy. That was 10 years ago. We don't have Mare Nostrum anymore. Frontex is in charge of external borders and participates in illegal refoulement. Commissioner, you said that Europe is the champion of human rights. The UN said that Europe, with its agreement in Libya, is participating in a crime against humanity. SNR relies on seamen and NGOs who are criminalized. 10 years of bloody policy and 10,000 dead in the Mediterranean. We've had a dismantlement of our system of reception and depriving people of freedoms and attacks from the far right. The need for reform has never been so urgent. It's urgent to tell the Council, Commission and the Parliament that they have a responsibility. We need to swiftly adopt the asylum and migration pact, and this reform. This is not based on research, and we're denying people their basic rights. Let's grasp the nettle, and we should continue to negotiate with the Council, and it will define the unconditional respect of fundamental rights and human rights.
Colleagues, respect your speaking times. We have a very long list, and it wouldn't be fair if not everybody can speak in this very important debate. So, Ms. Kanko, you have the floor.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. I had a friend who said that we should always be asking ourselves the right questions. He himself was always asking himself questions. He was extremely knowledgeable, but he thought that life was a school, a learning opportunity, and any conversation was a learning opportunity and a time to progress your own thinking. My question to my colleagues is, why has it taken 20 years to fail to come up with a solution to the tragedy of death at sea, a solution which would actually restore faith in politics on the part of our citizens? I've heard a great deal of criticism against your colleagues, criticism against the member states which don't want to have any asylum seekers and don't want to relocate them. But colleagues, you're overlooking the most important thing, which is that we need to restore proper controls at our borders. We need to get a grip on illegal migration flows. And therefore, we are going to have to take difficult decisions. We're going to have to do deals with the countries of origin and the ones with which we can cooperate to impose more stringent border controls. This is absolutely imperative. We've got to get a grip of the flows of migration coming into the EU, and then we've got to look at how we deal with them and integration. Thank you.
The asylum policy is a disaster. Year after year, hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants come to Europe, completely uncontrolled. Two simple facts. By 2050, there'll be 1 billion more people in Africa. Opinion polls show that 50% of young people want to migrate to Europe. So the pressure of migration is a permanent state of affairs. What is the answer from the EU? Nothing. Let's give migrants more rights. Let's open up for more legal migration from Africa and Asia. Let's make agreements with undemocratic dictatorships. The only realistic and right response to the challenge is a permanent model where a migrant, that if you come to Europe, you'll never come in. You'll be rejected. You'll be put in an asylum center in a third country. It's effective. It's worthy. It prevents criminal networks and it prevents illegal migration. This is the solution. But nobody here, nobody in the Commission, nobody in the Council is seriously working on that.
Thank you. I call Mr. Gilbert Collard.
Monsieur le Président,
President, colleagues, regarding this issue of immigration, we don't, on the one hand, have the good and on the other, the bad. We don't, on the one hand, have kind, good people and then on the other, evil, bad people. We don't have right, extreme left. No, there's a question here, one question. Those who are abusing our charity, are they moved by pity, compassion, or are they moved by profitability, and making money out of our sentiments? Today in Le Figaro newspaper in France, the President or Speaker of the Senate, who's not an extremist, a good man, kind, avuncular, said the current situation in the area of immigration is just not tenable. It's not possible. That's the truth of the situation. And you can do what you like. You can no longer accept this. And therefore, we have to put up the barriers that are required here. We need to act quickly. We need to have moral, legal and physical borders. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Lena Dupont.
Thank you very much, President. For 10 years, we're promising people that Europe has a common asylum and migration policy, and we can stop going from crisis to crisis. For 2 years, we've had the Commission proposals on the table. For 2 years, we're trying to find a balance between emergency measures and finding a common basis. It's necessary more than ever. If we look at our local authorities, if we look at the situation outside the EU, a pandemic, a brutal war of aggression by Russia, the situation has changed. Cynically, this has led a way for an agreement that has also increased the pressure on negotiations. I think I speak for many when I say that in this period we've gone through every emotion you can imagine. And now we're close to an agreement. We're very close to a solution. It's been difficult work, but we can do it. Why? Perhaps that's a reason why everybody's nervous. The smugglers, because their business model is threatened. The member states, the groups, because they have to practice realpolitik. But we can do this together or not at all. So everybody should come together, and perhaps we should stop to holding this up, because the next weeks, not the months or the years, it's the next weeks which are essential. Let's roll up our sleeves and be prepared for long nights. Otherwise, the powers who are not don't wish us well outside Europe, and those who don't want to have a solution in Europe, and it is the smugglers who will be celebrating. So this is the time to act.
Madam Isabel Santos, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senhor Comissário, Senhor Ministro, quando me perguntam se este pacto para...
Commissioner, we need to consider the response to this pact. I am in favour of it. I support it. I think it is an important pact which we need to put in place in order to make progress. But there is too much of a danger, because of the way the right is approaching this, that migrants are simply weaponized for nefarious purposes. We've got to have a much more carefully structured, coherent policy. We have to have protection of our external borders, and we need to support the countries of transit and origin. It is important that we have shared responsibility. It's important that we have recognition of human rights, and we need to have humanitarian routes of access for asylum seekers and refugees. So we need finally to have proper solidarity across the member states. We need to have proper shared responsibility, shared reception approaches and shared search and rescue. We've also got to move on to have a proper integration policy so that we can use the talents of the migrants coming into our continent. This therefore means that, yes, we need a pact, but we need a pact which is fit for the times in which we're living. We can't simply be having knee-jerk reactions.
To Mr. Van den Driessen, who is now not longer in the plenary, to say that really using population replacement here is a scandal, because maybe he doesn't find a problem, but simply to recall that population replacement has been used by Breivik, for example, as a justification to kill 69 young people in Norway. That's the reality. And I have to tell you, Mr. Sinas, that personally I think that it's good that we will have now a deal after 8 years, because you first of all, with the Council, try to find unanimity between the Member States, even when the treaty says it's not necessary unanimity. But I think that there are two things missing. First of all, a real legal route to enter the European Union. a European legal migration framework based on the blue card and not 27 different systems. And the second is giving the possibilities, in my opinion, that people can ask for asylum or refugee status in their country of origin or in the country of transit. You know what the drama and the tragedy is? That people need to come to Europe on the European territory to ask for asylum. So why not using our consulates? Why not using our embassies? Why not using and opening centers in the countries of origin? So there they can ask for asylum. And if it is agreed, then they can enter the European Union. And that is missing in your package.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verhofstadt. Next speaker is Mr. Damian Böselager. Bitte.
Dear colleagues, Minister, Vice President-elect, spokesperson of the left, we do need a deal and we do need a system very fast, because otherwise we will hear this kind of fear-mongering from the right that we heard earlier, not even shying away from Nazi terminology. This is something we have to get over. There is no far-right party that didn't rise on the topic of migration and asylum. I think that's very clear. But it does matter what kind of deal we get, what kind of system we get. And here I just want to say that while I'm happy that maybe we have a crisis position soon, it also matters what's in that position. And to be honest, what the member states are currently proposing doesn't really work. I mean, let's look at it. Jailing people and children in a camp would have not helped Italy in Lampedusa, nor would have helped the asylum seekers. Extending the time of jailing wouldn't have helped. Transferring some cash to Lampedusa from other member states wouldn't have helped. So we need to look at the actual system that we want and that actually works. So a system that works would have fast, decentralized procedures, a system that works would understand that we are one union and that we need to distribute people across the union to not have borders. A system that works would have understood that integration challenges and opportunities need to be solved within integration and not by reducing the amount of migrants or asylums that we get here. And a system that works would have a functioning search and rescue system. A system that works wouldn't put anyone in camps, especially not children. We are better than that. And a system that works wouldn't follow negative rhetorics, but understand that 75% of people actually getting asylum decisions at the moment in Germany are positive. So let's work for a system that works rather than just closing any deal. Thank you.
Herr Böselager, wir haben eine...
Mr. Böselager, we have a blue card for you. Konstant Bogdan, would you accept it? Yes?
We will speak in Polish. Please put on the headphones. Dziękuję, Damian, że przyjąłeś pytanie.
Thank you, Diamond, for accepting my question. I have a remark to make. You've been paying a lot of attention to the right wing, and you're saying the right wing is guilty of all the bad things that happen, but it's probably your socialist friend, a minister in the Danish government, who said a few weeks ago that the EU must be fenced in. Why don't you make a comment of what he said? And you keep on talking about the right wing, who are guilty of all the bad things. You have politicians from different political groups, but you always start talking it's the right wing who are the bad guys. It's not fair. It's not honest. Please comment on what was said by the Danish minister. Thank you.
So I think what I was trying to say and what I said is that every far-right party in Europe has grown on the topic of xenophobia and migration and asylum. And that is the truth. I also condemn anyone that uses easy populist solutions of saying, you know, the others are evil and we should keep them out. And it doesn't matter what kind of party family they're from. But it's definitely true that every far-right politician sitting here has used this rhetoric and even went so far as to using Nazi terminology in this House. And that is not okay and that's not acceptable.
Thank you very much. Now we continue with Mr. Patrick Jaki, please.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. Let's say it straight in the face. What are the results of your migration policy? In 2021, every second perpetrator in Spain was a foreigner. Every fifth was African. And it's also the Afghani and the Pakistanis who are perpetrators, many, many times more likely to be perpetrators of crimes, people from Algeria or locals. According to research from 2016, 70% of French Muslims want Sharia law to be introduced in France. And what you are proposing is more of the same. Although residents of Europe don't want it. They want to stop illegal migration. So the question to be asked is, why are you forcing this project? Because it's ideological to destroy our Christianity, national states, and to win votes for liberals and the left. You only want power, but we are supposed to pay with our security. So my message to you is, Poles will stop your migration pact in a referendum to be held in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Bernard Zimniok.
Herr Präsident.
President, mass migration is now out of control. Uncontrolled entry of hundreds of thousands of people has dramatic consequences, murders, etc. Has consequences, but the EU is doing nothing. Instead of preventing illegal migration, the pact will mean that we'll have forced redistribution of migrants in Europe. Given overpopulation and a lack of jobs in Africa, will have further masses coming here. The EU, through this pact, doesn't want to end migration. On the contrary, it's being cemented and promoted. I call for a campaign based on the Australian example. They're not getting in any migration. Australians are not enriched by any cases of rape. Colleagues, if agrees to this tax-financed migration pact, the financing those that they are betraying the interests of those who have elected them.
Next
speaker.
Janas Stanoka, please.
Thank you, Chair. When discussing the EU asylum and migration package, people by default are going to regulate the issue of immigration. The case someone is coming from the third country to the EU. But take your time. My country is very fond of turning codes inside out. Latvian lawmakers have figured out a way to force large groups of permanent residents to leave the country. First group are locals who were not recognized as Latvian citizens 30 years ago and later acquired citizenship of Russian Federation. Recently, 3,760 people have received orders to leave the country by failure to apply for exam on the Latvian language mastery. But our new old governing party has just outlined another category. They want to take away Latvian citizenship from disloyal people. In the case, it was acquired through the process of naturalization. So I want to ask Vice President Šinas, are you ready to create a special package for the case of forced emigration?
Thank you. Next speaker is Ms. Elisabeth Vosenberg-Vrionidi, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Vice President, you know that only in 2023, more than 2,500 people lost their lives or went missing in the Central Mediterranean. In the eastern route, and in the Aegean more specifically, human trafficking and smuggling networks continue their activities. The Greek government has been successful in protecting the Greek borders and the European borders in the last 4 years. But if we do not combat these illegal network with a joint and solidary reaction from all member states, we cannot combat the phenomenon. And how can we implement these pacts with countries of origin? We need legal routes of migration. This is more urgent than ever. We have a legal and moral responsibility to rise up to the occasion and to the challenges and to the expectations of European citizens. And with the other colleagues, we came to a fair text. When there's a will, there's a way. So we owe the European citizens a real proof of the fact that solidarity is a European value. And I firmly believe that if all member states take their commitments and fulfill them, we could indeed complete the pact before our mandate ends. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Pedro Silva Pereira, please.
Obrigado, Presidente.
Thank you, President. There are few decisions which are so urgent on the European political agenda as the adoption of the European Asylum and Migration Pact. The tragedy that we see daily in the Mediterranean, where more than 2,000 people have died since the start of this year. All this calls for an immediate reaction in line with the circumstances. This is a European situation, and this response must be European, and this can only be built on solidarity. We need solidarity with Lampedusa and the countries which are in the front line. And we must support them in the reception of refugees and migrants. We need solidarity with the countries of origin where the migrants come from, so that we can tackle the causes of migration, so that we can be more efficient in dealing with criminal trafficking networks. We need solidarity with migrants and refugees themselves. And with the help of SAR, we must create legal migration routes so that there are good possibilities to receive these people. The Spanish Council presidency has acted well by making this a priority, and I hope it's successful, because we shouldn't pretend the fight between solidarity and extremist populism is a question where it goes of life and death.
Gracias. Thank you very much, President, Vice President, Secretary of State. Few doubt that Dublin III regulation is insufficient for purposes. And therefore, we need to have a policy based on solidarity, but also on shared responsibility for all member states, not just those of us who have external borders. We need to also grant asylum to those who are fleeing war, persecution. And it's part of what we are. We want to help people live a dignified life. We want to help them for the future. Therefore, we need to have sustainability in our welfare system. But of course, we need to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed by the situation, that we don't have instability, social instability. And we need to be able to say that without being lambasted for it. We believe in orderly and regulated migration. I mean, some people want to fearmonger, want to spread hate speech. Are we only going to hear them? No, we should also think about those who are thinking of Europe's future. And for all of these people, we need this pact as soon as possible. If we don't do this, if we fail, then I'm afraid it's the people who've been hearing this morning coming out with nonsensical things who will be the only ones heard.
D'Amato Rosa. And I also have to announce that I will close the blue card procedure because we're really running late, and I want to take at least one person for the Catch the Eye from each group. Thank you very much. And please respect your speaking time, really, please. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. 10 years ago, President Barroso, having looked at the endless line of coffins in Lampedusa, said Europe cannot turn its back on this. Yet, 10 years hence, Europe does not have a search and rescue policy worthy of any name. Indeed, search and rescue operators are criminalised, and immigrants are dying at sea and in the desert. We are even engaged in pushbacks at sea, which is utterly inhumane. Of course, Europe is not perfect, but really, we do need to have some principles, and I'm glad to see that we're agreeing on the crisis mechanism in principle for redistribution in times of crisis. But if this proposal is at the moment blocked, it's entirely because of the Italian government. Mainstream populists don't want to make progress. They just want to foment hatred in order to win seats. And they want to engage in attacks in order to hide the void at the heart of their policy. What is their problem with immigration? People who are fleeing hunger, starvation, war, half of it which we've caused anyway by exploiting with our ruthless capitalism everything that these peoples had. There is no redistribution of wealth, which is what we ought to see in a green and socially orientated market. Thank you.
Poštovani kolege, colleagues, 2 weeks ago on the border between Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, shots were fired by migrants and people smugglers at Croatian police. And the so-called humanitarian organizations are not saying a word about it. And if by chance it were the other way around, if the Croatian police had shot at the migrants, these associations would have been attacking the Croatian police here for months on end. So the police who do legal work may not use weapons, but illegals obviously may. So really we can wonder who is being crazy here. So all of you who encourage illegal and uncontrolled migration, take those migrants home with you. Do not force us to receive them or to pay you 20,000 euro for each migrant. You know, in Croatia, a person who has worked and paid taxes for 40 years has an average pension of about 500 euro, which means about 6,000 euros per year. Now we should pay 3 times more for one migrant, 20,000 euro. So get serious, really. We need a complete change of the policy.
Next speaker is Herr Harald Wilimski.
Danke sehr.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to project myself into your world, the European Union. You know, we're a big union. Can we solve these big problems of the day? Quite frankly, I put myself in your place and I just can't stop laughing. Since 2015, we've been trying time and time again to use the same instruments in order to resolve this illegal migration crisis. Same thing every time. It's a complete failure. We can see that today. In this debate, which is the need for a speedy adoption of the Pact on Migration and Asylum, again, you're trying to use the same instruments. Redistribution. You're trying to solve the problems the same way. It's not going to take us any further. 8 million people, approximately, illegally on the continent. You know, you've got the Geneva Convention. They're not allowed a status according to that convention because of their circumstances. And yet, nevertheless, you know, if they were to lose their entitlement to stay, they still stay. This is not a solution. This is not a viable solution. The only solution was the one pointed out by my colleague, Mr. Zabonski, a no-way policy. We need to help people locally. We can't bring them all to Europe.
Next speaker is Mr. Kolakušić.
You call them refugees, now you call them migrants. It is high time to call them what they truly are, criminals. When Croats go to work to Germany, when Germans move to Spain, this is the definition of migrants. Those who travel via woods and forests and mountains by paying smugglers to cross legally about 10 national borders, and if they're called migrants, only false liberals, false Greens can call them such, who want to ban plastic straws and Q-tips to save Europe. Frau Merkel and her pet von der Leyen have almost ruined Germany, and they're about to ruin the rest of us as well. You want to turn us into Sweden today. We won't have it. By direct abuse of social funds, you finance the smuggling of millions of people into Europe using the money of poorer and poorer European citizens. We won't have it.
Dear colleague, it's not appropriate to call migrants criminals. This is not acceptable. We continue with our colleague Dolores Montserrat, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Presidente, Comisario, Secretario de Estado.
Commissioner, President, Secretary of State, migration is a common challenge for the European Union, not just for the southern Mediterranean countries such as Spain. Thousands of lives are at stake, and the stability of many regions in the European Union which are not able alone to tackle the arrival of many migrants. We have in Spain seen that the Canaries and Ceuta and Melilla are struggling. Search and rescue is rescuing literally thousands of people every year. In 2022, more than 20,000 people were saved from sea. We therefore need to have a common migration policy based on solidarity to those who need protection. We also need proper monitoring and control of our borders so that we can have secure migration linked to employment and so that we can finally vanquish this scourge of these criminal mafias and traffickers. We've got to stop the attempts of third countries weaponizing the movements of migrants to try to force the hand of the European Union. We've seen this last year and the year before in both Ceuta and Melilla and elsewhere. We need a realistic policy, not just a utopian idea. We have really got to ensure, and especially now that Spain is in the presidency of the EU, Mr. Sanchez, that we actually recognise the principles we need to deliver on. And it's not actually allowing an amnesty at home in Spain for those who sought to subvert the law. It's standing up for the principles and rights of the citizens of Europe. Thank you.
Spoštovani visoki zbor, število prihodov pribežnikov na evropska tla.
The number of refugees in Europe is going up again. More and more arrivals are seen in Slovenia. The circumstances are serious, but they're worst in the Mediterranean, Lampedusa and the Canaries. Yesterday, we marked the 10th anniversary of one of the worst shipwrecks in our territory. And the Mediterranean has become the biggest mass grave of refugees, and more people die there each year. We must know what we must do. We must have a root and branch reform, and this must be based on justice and fairness. We've done our work in the European Parliament, but the main element has to be tackled by the member states. We must act now, immediately. We must not be paralysed when it comes to migration, because it's only smugglers and the far right who benefit from the situation. It's important to adopt this package before the European elections. We can't have any more failure.
Thank you, Vice President. Commissioner Chinas, I was encouraged by your presentation this morning. You were able to document genuine progress and demonstrated real energy to deliver the pact. I do take issue, however, with the characterization of the EU-Tunisia partnership, the strategic partnership, as being necessary and workable. We should have known from Libya that efforts to stop human trafficking resulted in torture in captivity in Libyan detention centres. We should have known from border management funding in other African partner countries that no serious human rights guardrails are implementable. Requests for reports on human rights impacts of these arrangements by MEPs have gone unanswered by the Commission. I come from a country where we had 200 years of mass emigration. Now 40 million Americans claim Irish descent. Many of them emigrated in leaky boats, and yet there are many in Ireland who would pull the ladder up behind them. It is for this and many other reasons that the Pact, for all its imperfections, is urgently necessary. I hope you and the Council will approach the forthcoming negotiations with flexibility and pragmatism. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Prochain orateur.
Thank you. The next speaker is François-Xavier Bellamy. Thank you, President, Commissioner. The 13th of September, a boat arrived in Lampedusa, and on the 21st of September, the ECJ responds to France. A member state doesn't have the right to refool a person who seeks to enter illegally. Before an expulsion, there has to be a period for the person to voluntarily leave the territory. So the only thing that a member state can do is to politely ask people not to violate their frontiers. And there is still the possibility to invite them not to stay. That just shows that European law is turned on its head. The maximum of the procedure, the maximum of complexity, the maximum jurisprudence shows injustice against the networks which have made the cornerstone of their dirty business. It's injustice against the citizens of the people, and democracies can't decide who they receive or not and to master their destiny. It's an injustice against law itself, because it creates an area of non-law. It's necessary to put law in its proper place.
Schouten, please.
Wel, voorzitter, commissaris.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, President, colleagues, tragedy after tragedy has followed in the Mediterranean, and as night follows day, calls for a practical solution have been voiced. But looking back to 2013, when 368 people died in a tragic shipwreck in Lampedusa, we have achieved far too little. I was in Lampedusa at the weekend to commemorate the tragedy, but also, as Mr. Bartolo said, to try to learn from it, because it is time for the member states to learn from the people of Lampedusa how to show a humane and humanitarian approach and how to treat migrants decently. We have got the shameful Tunisia deal, which has simply fomented anger and is nothing more than political window dressing concocted by Ms. von der Leyen and Rutte and Ms. Meloni. How many more people need to die before we can actually put together a pact on migration that is actually worthy of the name and a top priority of our time? Thank you.
Since 2014, here in the European Parliament, I've been voting in favor of proposals to deal with the migration and refugee issue, but nothing seems to be working. Under the Juncker presidency, we had voted in favor of a very good proposal. But look at the Tunisian leader, who is actually a dictator. He did not allow for the European MEPs to send there, no questions asked. He has complete disregard of the aid from the European Union because he thinks that it is just charity. Again, there is nothing going on, basically. We would like to have a deal with Tunisia, but we don't really have one. What we do have are some efforts from von der Leyen, the European People's Party, and Mrs. Meloni. It is a shame that Mr. Weber is not here now to listen to my views. We all talk about the tragedy in Lampedusa with 400 people dead, but what about the 700 people that lost their lives off the coast of the Peloponnese this summer? Why don't you talk about them? Didn't these people have souls? Didn't their lives matter? This is how dignity is lost in the European Union.
Ms. Francesca Pepucci.
Onorevoli colleghi.
Colleagues, how many further deaths do there need to be in the Mediterranean for member states to wake up and realise they need to shoulder their responsibilities? How much longer are we going to play into the hands of human traffickers, those who are trading in drugs and arms, as well as people's lives? How long is it going to take us to find a commonly accepted solution? Migration flows are a huge problem. They're a genuine challenge to contemporary society. And this is not a challenge just for Italy, it's a challenge for the entirety of the European Union and each individual member state. Nobody should be engaged in ethical lecturing. Everybody has got to shoulder their responsibility and has got to play their part. It is absolutely unthinkable that we do anything else. We can't just abandon a number of countries to shoulder the whole burden of the migration policy of the European Union. People are fleeing war and persecution and coming to the European Union. For goodness sake, let's give them a dignified reception and let's make sure that we treat them properly. On the other hand, let us return those who have no right to be here. We've got to have a proper policy and we have got to enforce it. Thank you.
Very much. Next speaker is Mr. Cyrus Engerer, please.
Grazie, Sir President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I spoke to a lot of people in our squares and in our streets in Malta and in other countries. And do you know what they say about immigration? Europe has failed. I spoke to immigrants in detention centres and in open centres, and even they say that Europe has failed with respect to immigration, as have said a lot of you in this Parliament. Europe has failed. 8 years ago, it's been 8 years since the ministers have been discussing in Council. In our Parliament, we have done our work. We have a strong position reached at a reasonable time, but we have been waiting for Council for the past 8 years. I hope that in the meeting they have this morning, they will come out with a position. In the meantime, the Commission is putting in money without the consent of this Parliament in Tunisian pockets to try and close the mouth of the populists on this side of the Parliament. But it is useless because we know Sayed hasn't done anything. We have seen what happened in Lampedusa in the past few weeks and months. Citizens deserve a solution, whatever the situation Europe is in.
Tahlani, please.
The right-wing populists are like birds of prey. They are waiting to see the next tragedy. They actually see this as an opportunity to stop the migration pact for the EU. They've declared a culture war against all those who don't look like them. They talk, of course, about protecting European civilization, using big words, but they are like birds of prey, waiting, watching, seeing, so that they can actually take over our union, reintroduce border controls, barbed wire. They're prepared to pay, in fact, for all the border guards that we have in order to stop people coming in, because their dream society is basically premised on mistrust for the other. If you don't have the same background, the same origins as them, you're automatically a criminal. In Renew, we are fighting for the survival of Europe, but we're fighting against populists, extremists, barbed wire, fences, walls. In my Europe, I too have a place. I came as a child. I was a refugee, and I came to Sweden. I belong there, to the Swedish rural area, to the European Parliament, to Europe. The Parliament has delivered, the Commission has delivered. Now it's for Council to deliver. Don't just let these birds of prey sit there, watch, and build barbed wire fences everywhere.
Mr. Gabriel Mato.
Thank you, President. Vice President, the borders of Europe are absolutely overwhelmed. In the Canaries, we are sadly aware of the implications of all these arrivals. Thousands of people are coming to our islands, and we can't actually have any proper reception arrangements for them. We have endless boats coming to our shores, more than 15,000 people in a year, and there are many who have tragically lost their lives on the way. Thousands of souls which have perished attempting to come to our islands, and we don't even have any proper infrastructure to welcome them when they're there. We don't even have a proper plan to integrate them into European society. This is why we need this new package immediately. We can't afford any more crises. We don't have a properly cohesive, concerted policy to address these issues. And areas such as the Canaries simply can't take on this huge responsibility for managing a policy which actually, after all, affects everybody. It may be that we have a maritime frontier, but we have got to ensure that solidarity prevails right across the European Union in difficult times as well as in the easier times. It's not just a question of caste. Thank you.
Thank you, dear President, dear Vice President, dear Secretary of State. Mrs. Montserrat, I turn to you. You've come here to talk about amnesty. Now, this is the European Parliament. I think you need to show some dignity here. We are talking about the European Parliament, and the purpose of this debate is so important. So just a little bit of dignity. Now, Lampedusa. Lampedusa is Europe, Europe is Lampedusa. But managing migratory flows requires a European response based on solidarity in full respect of human rights. So walls, migratory agreements with Tunisia, they're not the solution. Let's not delude ourselves. It's actually an invention of the extreme right. It's not desirable. It's not feasible. If we want to face this migratory challenge with success, we have to show political will. We have to show determination, just as we did with the pandemic, Putin's war, the economic and social fallout from that. The Migration and Asylum Pact is a necessary pact, but not enough in itself. We need to go beyond, opening up humanitarian channels, allowing regular migration, and we also need to step up our cooperation with countries of origin and countries of transit. And finally, allow me to turn to the Spanish presidency of the EU. I would ask you to please initiate a rescue at sea operation policy for Europe as a whole. Please make sure this happens. Thank you.
Speaker is Mr. Lucas Furlas, please.
Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, it is high time we set a cohesive and comprehensive policy for the migration crisis. Countries such as Cyprus were left alone to deal with such major crisis. Right now, 7% of my under-occupation country are seeking our asylum seekers. Most of them are coming from the Turkish-speaking side illegally. We know the consequences. We have felt them. We have experienced them. But we need to overcome the obstacles. Otherwise, we have severe and major crises. So we need to have a real solution for this problem, and we will stand by your side, Mr. Vice President.
Rina Olsson, please.
10,000 individuals arrived in Lampedusa over 3 days recently. Lampedusa has a population of 6,000. It's actually smaller than Lidingö, an island in Sweden. 200 vessels, 10,000 people. If they were to arrive in Lidingö over 3 days, think of the headlines. The situation would have been seen as unsustainable, completely unsustainable, and it is unsustainable. Time and time again, we are firefighting, but we come in after the event. The EU can't continue like this. This is not a project. Europe can't help everyone. What we can do, however, is take our own responsibilities. The member states of the EU are sitting around a negotiating table. They are negotiating a policy. That's, of course, a breakthrough, and we shouldn't underestimate it as that. And historically speaking, it is unprecedented. But we are still waiting for solutions. We need to have one common framework for policies, not 20 different one. We have the old pact. We need it, but we need to make sure that we have a fair distribution of responsibility around Europe so that we can have a long-term policy.
Yes, please. Do you have a point of order?
Caro Presidente, era solo per segnalare che non
Thank you, President. It was just to say that we didn't hear any Italian interpretation for the last statement.
La dernière intervention. Voilà.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Benifei.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Yesterday, here in the Chamber, we commemorated the 10th anniversary of the Lampedusa tragedy. 368 women, men and children who lost their lives in this quest for a better life. It is absolutely terrible to think that this package on migration and asylum is still blocked because some people think that NGO ships are simply encouraging migration. The data shows that this is not the case. That notwithstanding, there are people from Fratelli d'Italia in this chamber who have said absolutely shameful things between yesterday and today. In the wake of that disaster, there was Mare Nostrum. We remember what happened there. The Mare Nostrum search and rescue mission was suspended, but is now actually being reinstated, we hope. But Italy is now actually trying to criminalise those who are actually operating search and rescue, and it is actually failing to recognise that millions of people need action because too many thousands of people have lost their lives over these recent years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, adopting a common policy on asylum and immigration is an absolute necessity to protect those at risk, to streamline our way to deal with immigration, and to combat the way that totalitarian regimes take advantage of this migratory flows. The policies implemented by the EU in the past years do not take into account the real situation in the member states that are systematically abused. And a flagrant example is the illegal regime of Erdogan, who is utilizing and weaponizing the migratory flows towards Cyprus, and this is how these people, these migrants, are transferred to Turkey, from there to the occupied territories of Cyprus, and from there they switch over to the Republic of Cyprus. And this is where, in an organized fashion, they seek asylum, but the vast majority of them are not refugees. So a simple question to Mr. Schinas: how are you going to deal with this problem in action and in reality?
Please.
Thank you, President. Yesterday we marked the 10th anniversary of the Lampedusa tragedy. 10 years later, we saw one tragedy after another in the Mediterranean. And I ask, what have we learned? Nothing. Many empty words, many declarations, many promises that were never kept. A lot of rhetoric from the extreme right, who, instead of losing themselves in this rhetoric, they should convince their governments. And in the meantime, hundreds of people, men, women, children, and babies, continue to die every day in our seas. For many years, we have been requesting a mechanism of solidarity between member states, especially the member states at the border. Solidarity that every member state is supposed to have signed for when it joined the European Union. Solidarity that we only use and abuse where we want and where it suits us. We have to move from words to facts. The European Pact on Migration and Asylum must be adopted before the end of this legislature. And we have to do this to save the lives of so many people and to protect border countries from a disproportionate burden. We must also do it in order to send a message to our citizens that the European Union is not just a talking shop, but an institution capable of taking action and leaving a positive effect.
Now to the Catch the Eye. I have 19 requests. We cannot take them all. As I said, we take one from each political group and in the order how they requested the speaking time. So we start in 1 minute. Tom van den Kendelare, please.
Voorzitter, collega's, het migratiepact is eigenlijk niet meer en niet minder dan een echte testcase.
Ladies and gentlemen, migration is a test for the process of European integration, and the same is true in terms of acceptance by the citizens of Europe. The Migration and Asylum Pact will actually allow us, and this process so far has shown us where there are majorities. If we do not have unanimity in terms of the letter rather than the spirit. So the question remains as to whether qualified majority is dead in the water. I think the Migration Pact should also allow us to ascertain what is likely to occur in future. This is not going to be a further enlargement. I think the people will not go along with that if we cannot cope at home.
Domnule comisar, domnule președinte, stimați colegi,
Commissioner, President, dear colleagues, the case of migration and what we are debating today is a clear example of the fact that we should not take decisions before regulation. Mrs. Merkel has decided to initiate migration without discussing with her colleagues, and this is why we have hundreds of thousands of migrants to whom we are not able to ensure decent living conditions. This is why it's very important that we finally come to a pact on migration, clearly regulating what legal migration is, what illegal migration is, ending traffic. Because I don't agree with you that we have a half-built house. We have the house of the European Union, but we must know clearly how many people can we let in, how can we welcome them, and when we have illegal migration, we must reject it, because solidarity must go hand in hand with the security of European citizens. This is how I believe we must regulate, and I hope that Council will finally step up and approve this package.
Madam Melcher.
Thank you very much. For 80 år siden,
80 years ago, my father fled in an illegal fishing boat to Sweden. Our European institutions are built to prevent that once again we deny the rights of refugees. And more than 10 years after Lampedusa, we've been waiting for a solution. It's up to, we owe it to Simone Veil, we owe it to those who were murdered in the camps to have a safe and fair reception of refugees.
Saskia Brikmont.
oui, il y a 10 ans,
Thank you. 368 people lost their lives in the drama of Lampedusa 10 years ago. It's now 28 million men, women and children. 28,000 men, women and children who have died without anyone stepping up to prevent it. For 10 years we have seen hate and anti-immigrant rhetoric fortress Europe, which is leading to these dramas. Agreements about this pact are relating to obligatory solidarity between member states, but one of the fundamental criteria for doing away with this crisis at our borders and for reception in our countries is to achieve such solidarity. We see border detentions, including of children, in our member states. This is not based on a humane, solidarity-based policy. We need to look at what we can do for them, not sending people back, not refusing entry and sending people back to authoritarian regimes. We need to respond with solidarity and a human spirit to our sisters and brothers, as we did with Ukrainians.
Fidanza.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Up until now, Europe has failed when it comes to migration policy. The reason for this, the responsibility of this, is actually to be found at the door of those who have spoken out, calling on criticising the close policies of the right. This is hypocritical. For many people on the left in Europe, they want to send back pregnant women, children. They want to transport refugees to Rwanda, leaving our borders open, while at the same time supporting NGOs which transport illegal immigrants to our coasts. We should reject this immorality. We have very few instruments. We should use them. The time really has come to bring an end to this traffic. We have to start boycotting this. We have a 10-point plan, but we seem to be pretending it doesn't exist now. We are facing an absolute failure of the redistribution policy, and this means that the European Mare Nostrum is now being flooded. We seem to be working the principle of business as usual, this human traffic, where the only thing which would save us now is to stop people leaving the coasts.
grazie Presidente.
Thank you, President. A few days ago, an Italian judge let 3 illegal immigrants from Tunisia be released, saying that detaining them would run counter to European law. That judge then went onto social media and talked about Salvini and getting signatures for opening doors to allow people in, not just allow them in, but give them their plane tickets. We don't only have EU legislation which doesn't work, but we also see politicised judiciaries, such as Italian judges. It's a battle for civilization, and only the Lega is really fighting this battle. Our governments need to understand that the EU will never solve this problem. This Europe is in submission to the left, those who would encourage such an invasion. Meloni has trusted the EU, for instance, with the memorandum on Tunisia, but has been betrayed. In 2024, we need the centre-right to work together without entering the mortal embrace of the left.
Speaker is Ms. Demirel Özlem, bitte. Please, thank you. 1 minute. Ms. Frau Özlem.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. For an hour from over there, I'm hearing that migrants are criminals. I have to say very clearly, at 5 years old, as a daughter of a political refugee, I left Turkey for Germany. I and people like me aren't criminal. But what is criminal? Fascists are criminals. And of course, we know that from history. And we know, above all, from the houses that burned down in Germany because Nazis want to kill migrants. President, a friend of mine said he was in the opposition in Turkey. He was, because of the Erdogan government, he was thrown out of his job, his wife also. So now he's just working in a tobacco farm. So his wife is sick, and he fled to Norway on the Balkan route. He was fleeing from someone with whom the EU has a refugee deal.
We continue with Mr. Fabio Massimo Castaldo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Frau Kollegin, bitte schön.
Madam, order please. Please respect the speaking time.
The floor.
Yeah. Grazie, Presidente. Cari colleghi, quante volte in questi anni...
Thank you, President. How often have we heard over the last few years of the problem of one-off immigration rather than structural immigration? After many years following the first people landing, we still haven't got the measures. 136,000 people at the end of September still waiting for the asylum to be processed. Our Italian islands have collapsed in the face of the arrivals, and we do deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for what's been done. The solution simply can't be to further analyse ways in which we can close down our borders. What worked with Turkey won't work with Tunisia. We can't simply stand back and watch these flagrant violations, brutal violations of human rights. Either we have to devote all our energy to fighting against these problems or become accomplices of what's happening. We've had enough of what's happening. We've had enough of these people adopting fake positions. Either we ensure that European law be respected, either we ensure that we protect solidarity, common mechanisms, or we see a collapse of cooperation between the European Union and Africa. We can't simply allow the Mediterranean to be a cemetery for our values and ideals.
Mr. Commission Vice President Schinas, please.
Thank you, President, honourable members. Let me thank each one of you for your very rich contribution to this debate. Let me tell you from the start that I have the full respect to all positions expressed here, even the extreme ones. Our job since December 2019 was not to reproduce what we disagree upon, but to create a landing zone around which we can all find, finally, a solution for our migration problems. Everything we do not like about migration in Europe nowadays is the direct, immediate consequence of the fact that Europe does not have a migration and asylum system. Moria, Lampedusa, Canary Islands, Ceuta, Calais. These are the symptoms. These are the consequences. The root of the problem is that we need a system. Many times, some of you would have heard me describing our pact proposals as a house with 3 floors. First floor, relations with countries of origin and transit. We will never be able to manage internally unless we manage externally. Second floor, border management. It is morally, politically, and legally unfair to delegate the responsibility for our external border to the 5 member states that geography has put them at the perimeter of our union. This is a collective task. Floor number 3, solidarity and burden sharing. Everyone would have to contribute to the solidarity mix that we would need in a given situation so that the union lives up to its name as a union. The problem with this House is up to now, many people, member states, political forces, wanted to take the lift and go straight to the floor that they like the most. Those who would prefer the first and the second would say no need for the third floor, because if we had less arrivals, if we had border management, no solidarity. And those who insist on solidarity had a tendency to neglect the importance of border management and strong relations with countries of origin. Let me take this opportunity to say it loudly and clearly, especially as ambassadors are still meeting on the pact in Brussels. This House, with the 3 floors, will be built at the same time, and all floors will be of equal resistance. Otherwise, there will be no House. Few words on external relations of migration policy. I know this is a delicate issue, and I have no problem to admit that much of the work we did in the past in countries of origin and transit did not succeed. We are the biggest development aid in the world, and still we didn't manage to obtain added value for our development aid in Africa and elsewhere. We built enough highways, airports, most of them constructed by European construction companies, but we didn't create opportunities for people to have better lives in these countries instead of putting their lives in the hands of the smugglers in the Mediterranean. Now we have an opportunity to change the paradigm, do partnership agreements that would create opportunities for the young, for women, for those who are most in need, and at the same time mobilize everything we have, not only money, but also trade preferences, visas, Erasmus scholarships. Europe has to approach countries of origin with a holistic partnership viewpoint. And I understand and I share the doubt and skepticism about authoritarian leaders in our perimeter. I do not live in an exoplanet. I can count democracies in our neighborhood. But I cannot accept also the argument, often by the same people, accusing us of doing nothing with countries of origin and transit, and accusing us again of contracting authoritarian leaders when we do something in order to address their concerns. This cannot happen both ways. We have to assume that we have to work with everybody, but under the very clear caveat that we will not relinquish our European values and principles. We do not need a fortress Europe, we need a partner Europe. Finally, I found much encouragement in this debate this morning, but the most encouraged moment was when the left accused me of playing in the tune of the extreme right, and the extreme right accused me of organizing the campaign of the left. That's the biggest encouragement for me. We are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. And now the floor goes to State Secretary Pascual Navarro Rios, please.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, President. The Presidency has done its utmost to reach an agreement on the mandate for resolving the crisis. At present, COREPER is engaged in discussions, and it is my hope, and indeed I trust, that an agreement will soon be reached. It is taking time to reach an agreement because it is our conviction that a broad degree of support from all Member States is necessary for such an important element of the pact. More specifically, the need for rapid application should it prove necessary. Both co-legislators have shown a constructive spirit throughout the interinstitutional negotiations, and I believe that we will be able to reach an agreement in relation to many issues. We still have a lot of work ahead of us, and I would like to recall before this chamber that we're still awaiting the Parliament's position on the Returns Directive. We appreciate what many of you have said, that we should strive for consensus in relation to most of the proposals on the table. We are doing our utmost in the Presidency to reach a political agreement before the end of our Presidency. Recent tensions in relation to migration demonstrate that we need a common European migration policy, and we have no time to lose. Thank you.
It is now closed, and the sitting will continue with the formal address by His Excellency Mr. Petr Pavel, President of the Czech Republic. Thank you.